It happened on an ordinary night, a quiet suburban street. Street lights humming above. The kind of place where people felt safe leaving their doors unlocked, where neighbors waved to one another, and where nothing big ever seemed to happen. But on this night, safety was an illusion. A car came barreling down Maple Avenue, headlights slicing through the dark. Witnesses would later say the driver barely hit the brakes before impact. A thud, a scream, and then silence. By the time neighbors rushed outside, a young man lay motionless on the asphalt. The car, gone, vanished into the night. His name was Ethan Ramirez, a 22-year-old college student. A son, a brother, a kid who had just started dreaming about graduate school. For his family, that moment was the beginning of a nightmare. But what no one could imagine was that this tragedy wouldn't just be about one reckless driver. It would unravel into something far darker, a cover-up that reached all the way to the top of the police department. Within hours, officers arrived on the scene. They worked quickly, stringing up yellow tape and logging evidence. Neighbors gave statements. Some swore they had seen the car, a dark SUV. Others thought it might have been silver. But as the days passed, confusion turned into frustration. Police said they had no viable leads. The case was described as tragic but difficult, and the public was told that, despite their best efforts, the investigation had hit a dead end. For Ethan's parents, it felt like a slap in the face. How could a hit and run in a quiet neighborhood leave no trace? No license plate, no suspect. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the truth was being buried. Inside the precinct, whispers began. A rumor here, a slip of the tongue there. Some officers suspected the case wasn't really unsolvable because word was spreading that the vehicle involved belonged to someone no one dared accuse. Police Chief Richard Monroe. Chief Monroe was a 25-year veteran, respected, untouchable, the kind of man who appeared in photos shaking hands with city leaders, always front and center at press conferences. He was also the kind of man who knew how to protect himself. And on the night Ethan Ramirez died, Monroe's black SUV had been spotted near the scene. Almost immediately, pieces of evidence began disappearing. A traffic camera that should have captured the SUV's path malfunctioned. A report from a rookie officer was corrected before being filed. Witness descriptions that didn't fit the narrative were quietly discarded. And Monroe himself? He publicly pledged to bring the driver to justice, all while knowing exactly who that driver was. It wasn't just negligence. It was manipulation, and for a while it worked. The case slipped into silence. The Ramirez family was left with nothing but grief, and Monroe carried on as if nothing had happened. But then, months later, the one thing Monroe didn't count on surfaced. The night of the accident, a rideshare driver had been parked a few blocks away, waiting for his next passenger. His dash cam was always rolling, a precaution after hearing too many stories of drivers being robbed or scammed. At first, he hadn't thought much about that night. He hadn't even realized what he'd captured. But when the Ramirez family began pleading with the public for help, he decided to check. And there it was, a black SUV, slight damage to the front bumper, speeding away from Maple Avenue at the exact time of the hit and run. The license plate? Crystal clear. The vehicle? Registered to none other than Chief Richard Monroe. The driver handed the footage to investigators. But somehow, it didn't make it into evidence. Weeks passed. Nothing. That's when frustration boiled over. Someone inside the department, a whistleblower, leaked the footage to the media. And in a matter of hours, the story exploded. Police chief's SUV tied to fatal hit and run. Dashcam footage contradicts official investigation. Cover-up allegations rock local PD. For Ethan's family, it was vindication. For Monroe, it was the beginning of the end. The footage triggered outrage. Protests formed outside the precinct. City council members demanded answers. And ordinary citizens, already skeptical of police accountability, flooded social media with anger. How can we trust a system that protects its own? Ethan deserves justice. Fire Monroe now. But inside the department, a different war was raging. Some officers stood by Monroe, insisting the footage was misinterpreted. Others whispered about years of questionable behavior, corners cut, cases mishandled, power abused. The blue wall of silence was cracking, but it hadn't fallen yet. When Monroe finally addressed the public, his tone was calm, measured, almost rehearsed. "Yes, that is my vehicle," he admitted. But then came the twist. He claimed he wasn't driving that night. According to him, the SUV had been borrowed by a family friend. And the department? He accused them of being victims of a smear campaign. It was a bold move, a gamble that maybe, just maybe, he could spin the narrative in his favor. But behind closed doors, even some of his closest allies weren't buying it. Reporters swarmed City Hall. Federal investigators circled. And the Ramirez family, once ignored, was now front-page news. For Ethan's mother, the revelation was bittersweet. She stood outside her home, clutching her son's photo, tears streaming down her face. "All we wanted was the truth," she said. "Why do they have to lie to us? Why do they let his memory be buried?" Her words struck a chord across the nation. This wasn't just about one boy. It was about trust. It was about power. And it was about how far those in authority would go to protect themselves. But here's the thing. The dashcam footage was just the beginning. Because as investigators dug deeper into Monroe's past, they uncovered something even more disturbing. Other unsolved accidents, other suspicious cover-ups, and whispers that Monroe hadn't been acting alone. The hit and run wasn't an isolated tragedy. It was the thread that could unravel a much larger web of corruption. And the question on everyone's mind was chilling. If the dashcam hadn't gone public, how many more lives would have been destroyed in silence? The dashcam footage had cracked open the door. But what came spilling out was darker than anyone expected. For weeks, headlines screamed about Chief Richard Monroe and his alleged hit and run. But beneath the noise, investigators, now federal, not local, started pulling at the loose threads of his career. And one by one, those threads began to unravel a tapestry of corruption that stretched far beyond one accident. It started with an anonymous envelope delivered to a journalist. Inside were copies of internal memos, all marked confidential, each memo linked to cases Monroe had overseen. Cases that, at first glance, looked like tragic coincidences. A homeless man struck and killed by a vehicle, no leads. A teenager accused of armed robbery, later found dead, self-inflicted. A witness in a narcotics case hit by a drunk driver who was never found. But together, a disturbing pattern emerged. Too many accidents, too many unsolved deaths, too many files closed without answers. The question wasn't just whether Monroe had covered up Ethan Ramirez's death. It was whether he had been covering for himself and for others for years. Meanwhile, the Ramirez family clung to hope that this new wave of attention would finally bring justice for Ethan. Ethan's father, Carlos, gave an interview on live television. "This isn't just about my son anymore. How many families never got answers? How many people buried their children while Monroe shook hands with politicians?" His voice cracked as he spoke, and across the country, people listened. Donations poured into the Ramirez family's legal fund. Protesters marched, not just in their city, but in others too, chanting Ethan's name, holding signs that read, "Justice for the silenced. No one is above the law." It was no longer a local story. It was a movement. Behind closed doors, though, Monroe was unraveling. Colleagues described him as on edge. He snapped at officers. He demanded loyalty. And worst of all, he started making threats. One detective, speaking off record, revealed. He told us, "If I go down, I'm not going down alone." It was a chilling statement, because if Monroe had dirt on others in power, city officials, judges, even fellow officers, then his downfall wouldn't just be about him. It could bring the whole system crashing down. The dashcam footage was still circulating online, viewed millions of times. Social media was ablaze. Everywhere you looked, there were comments. "Lock him up." Imagine how many victims never got justice because of this guy. Corrupt cops ruined lives. But amidst the outrage, there were defenders too. Some painted Monroe as a victim of a witch hunt. Others claimed it was a setup designed to discredit law enforcement. And just like that, the story became more than just local corruption. It became a national debate. Was Monroe one bad man? Or was he the symbol of something far worse? A system built to protect itself? Late one evening, a reporter received a message from an unknown number. If you want the truth about Monroe, meet me. Tonight, no cameras. The reporter hesitated. Could it be a trap? But curiosity and the promise of breaking the biggest story of her career pulled her in. She arrived at a dark parking lot. A man stepped out from the shadows. He was an officer. His badge gleamed under the streetlight, but his face was weary. And then he dropped the bombshell. Monroe wasn't working alone. The dash cam, that's just the tip of the iceberg. You need to look at the task force he built 10 years ago. That's where the bodies are buried. The reporter's heart pounded. If what he was saying was true, Ethan's death wasn't just covered up. It was connected to an organized network of corruption that had been operating for years, hidden in plain sight. As the story grew, so did the risks. The Ramirez family began receiving anonymous phone calls. Sometimes silence on the line. Other times, a voice whispering, "Drop it, for your own good." Their mailbox was smashed. Their car tires slashed. It became clear someone wanted to intimidate them into backing down. But instead of retreating, Ethan's mother stood outside City Hall, clutching a candle, and declared, "We will not be silenced. Ethan will not be silenced." The crowd around her erupted into chants. The more they tried to scare the family into submission, the louder the movement grew. Feeling the walls closing in, Monroe played his boldest card yet. He called a press conference. Reporters flooded in, cameras flashing. And then Monroe shocked everyone. He didn't deny the dash cam. He didn't even deny being near the scene of the hit and run. Instead, he leaned into the microphone and said, "What you think you know isn't the truth. The truth is bigger, much bigger. And if I go down, secrets about this city, about people you trust, are coming out with me." Gasps filled the room. Reporters shouted questions. But Monroe only smirked before walking away. The next morning, Monroe was scheduled to meet with federal investigators. But he never showed up. His SUV was found abandoned on the edge of town, driver's door wide open, engine still warm. No Monroe. No note. No trace. Had he fled? Had someone silenced him before he could talk? Or was this just another play in his dangerous game? The city was left reeling. The Ramirez family waited, desperate for closure. And the public asked the only question that mattered. If the police chief could vanish without a trace, who was really pulling the strings? The SUV still hummed faintly when officers arrived at the scene. The driver's door was ajar, headlights glowing against the trees, engine running as if its owner had just stepped away for a moment. But Chief Richard Monroe was nowhere in sight. No footprints in the mud. No cell phone. No wallet. Just silence, broken only by the ticking of the still warm engine. For the city, Monroe's vanishing wasn't just news. It was gasoline on a wildfire already raging. By morning, headlines screamed across the nation. Corrupt chief missing. Abduction or escape? Monroe vanishes hours before federal interrogation. Is someone cleaning house? Social media lit up with speculation. Some believed Monroe had fled to avoid prosecution. Others whispered about powerful hands removing him before he could spill their secrets. But one theory chilled everyone. What if Monroe himself had staged his disappearance? Not to run, but to reset the board. Meanwhile, the Ramirez family's nightmare deepened. Ethan's father, Carlos, woke up to find their front porch drenched in red paint. On the wall, someone had scrawled, "Let it go." Police took photos, but no arrests were made. Ethan's mother, Marisol, broke down during an interview. "They want to erase my son like he never existed. But we won't let them." Her words struck a chord. Across the nation, rallies grew louder, larger. In Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, thousands carried candles, chanting, "Justice for Ethan. No more cover UPS." What started as one family's cry for truth had become a movement too big to silence. 2 nights after Monroe's disappearance, the journalist who had received the anonymous memos got another message. No name, just an address and a single line. It wasn't supposed to happen this way. Against her better judgment, she went. At a dimly lit motel on the edge of town, She found the same weary officer who had whispered about Monroe's task force. This time, his hands trembled as he spoke. "You don't understand," he said. "Monroe disappearing wasn't his idea. He had protection. Real protection. Federal, state, city, all tied together. He wasn't just a cop. He was the gatekeeper. And now that he's gone," he trailed off, eyes darting to the shadows outside. "They'll start cleaning house. Witnesses, whistleblowers, even families." The reporter's stomach nodded. "Are you saying the Ramirez family?" The officer cut her off. "They're already in danger. If Monroe's dead, it's because he became expendable. And if they think the Ramirezes can rally the public, they're next." While fear spread on the streets, investigators behind closed doors were piecing together a darker picture. Those confidential memos weren't isolated. They pointed to a task force Monroe had built 10 years ago. On paper, it was a specialized unit targeting narcotics and organized crime. But off the books, it looked more like a shadow network. Cases went missing. Witnesses vanished. Evidence was lost. The task force's power stretched far beyond the police department, into the mayor's office, the courts, even the local business elite who had everything to gain from silence. And Monroe? He wasn't the mastermind. He was the middleman, the one who kept the machinery greased while the real players stayed invisible. Cable news split into two camps. On one side, anger, outrage, and cries for systemic reform. On the other, conspiracy theories that Monroe had been framed, that anti-police activists were destroying America's heroes. Hashtags trended hourly. Hashtag justice for Ethan. Hashtag where is Monroe? Hashtag in the cover-up. But buried beneath the noise was something even more dangerous. Disinformation campaigns, bots amplifying false narratives, fake accounts spreading confusion. Someone wanted the public divided, too divided to focus on the truth. Through it all, Marisol Ramirez refused to back down. At a vigil packed with hundreds, she raised Ethan's photo high above her head. "They can paint our walls, slash our tires, break our windows, but they cannot break us. Because Ethan is not just my son anymore. He belongs to all of us now." Her voice cracked, but the crowd roared back. "Ethan lives. Ethan lives." It was no longer about one tragedy. It was about every silenced voice. And then, just when the city began to believe Monroe might never be found, a video surfaced online. Grainy, low light, shaky hands filming from behind a cracked window. It showed Monroe alive, sitting in a chair, hands bound, a bruise swelling on his temple. A muffled voice off camera asked, "Who else knows?" Monroe looked up, his face pale, eyes darting with fear. "They all know," he whispered. "The files, they're not safe anymore. If they get out," the clip cut off. No timestamp, no location, just enough to prove Monroe hadn't fled. He'd been taken. Within hours, the video went viral. Was Monroe being held hostage by his own allies, desperate to keep him quiet? Or had enemies captured him, determined to make him pay? And what about the files he mentioned? If they contained the truth about the task force, about the web of corruption reaching into City Hall and beyond, then someone, somewhere, was sitting on a bombshell big enough to shatter the entire system. The Ramirez family clung to hope. The public demanded answers, and the journalists knew. If she didn't find those files before the people who silenced Monroe did, then Ethan's story and the movement it sparked might die in darkness. The grainy video of Chief Richard Monroe spread across every screen in America. People replayed the freeze frame of his battered face, the fear in his eyes, the cryptic warning. The files, they're not safe anymore. If they get out. And just like that, the nation's obsession doubled. Cable pundits barked over each other. Social feeds erupted with theories. Every major newsroom scrambled to answer one question. What files? Inside her cramped apartment, journalist Maya Torres hadn't slept in 36 hours. She kept the video paused at Monroe's whisper, looping it until her own reflection in the laptop screen looked as exhausted as his face. Her phone buzzed. Another anonymous message. "If you want the truth, be at Riverside Station. Midnight. Come alone." Her chest tightened. It smelled like a trap. But if Monroe was alive, if the files were real, this was the closest she'd come to blowing the lid off everything. She shoved her recorder in her bag, whispered a prayer, and left. Meanwhile, Ethan's family was under siege. That night, Carlos Ramirez jolted awake to glass shattering. A brick lay in the living room, wrapped in a note scrawled in black marker. "Your son died. Let's stay buried." Marisol clutched Ethan's photo to her chest, sobbing as neighbors poured in, helping sweep broken glass, comforting her. But the message was clear. Whoever had Monroe wanted them silenced, too. The old train yard loomed like a skeleton under the moonlight. Rusting freight cars, graffiti-covered walls. Silence, except for the distant drip of leaking pipes. Maya's footsteps echoed as she followed the directions. And then, a shadow emerged from between two cars. It wasn't Monroe. It was the weary officer she'd met at the motel, eyes bloodshot, voice a whisper. "They know you're digging too deep," he said. "But I can't watch this rot spread any longer." From his jacket, he pulled a battered USB drive, pressed it into her palm. This is what Monroe meant. Every name, every deal, 10 years of cover-ups. But if you open this, you won't just be exposing him. You'll be declaring war on people who don't lose. Before Maya could answer, a beam of light slashed through the darkness. Headlights, engines, black SUVs closing in. "Run," the officer barked, drawing his gun. Maya sprinted, clutching the drive like it was life itself. Bullets cracked against the metal siding of the train cars. Shouts thundered behind her. She zigzagged through the yard, heart slamming against her ribs. One SUV roared forward, tried to cut her off. She dove behind a stack of crates as the officer's gunfire popped in the distance, then stopped, silenced by a scream that made her blood freeze. He was gone. Now it was just her. She didn't stop running until she was back in her apartment, door locked, blinds drawn. Hands trembling, she plugged in the USB. Her screen filled with folder after folder. Case numbers, photos, audio recordings. The first file opened to a typed report. Subject, Ramirez Ethan. Incident, vehicular homicide. Orders, suppress evidence. Shift blame to intoxication. Approval, Chief Monroe. Authorization, Mayor's office. Maya's stomach lurched. This wasn't negligence. It was orchestrated. And Ethan was just one name in a sea of victims. Drug cases buried. Murder charges erased. Whistleblowers blacklisted, or worse, vanished. Every thread led upward, past Monroe, past the mayor, in a hands far more powerful. By dawn, Maya made her decision. She uploaded everything. Not to one outlet, too easy to shut down, but to dozens. Encrypted drops, mirrored servers, international watchdogs. Within hours, the files exploded across the internet. News anchors read the names out loud. Families saw their lost, loved ones finally acknowledged. Citizens poured into the streets, angrier than ever. The system couldn't contain it anymore, but neither could it ignore the threat. As the city burned with outrage, another video surfaced. This time clearer, this time longer. Monroe, bound to the same chair, blood drying on his temple. "They think I'm the villain," he rasped. "Maybe I was, but I wasn't the top. I was just a piece on the board. You want the truth? Look higher. Look where the cameras never go. If you're seeing this, then I'm all ready." The feed cut to static. That night, thousands gathered outside City Hall. Marisol stood at the steps, Ethan's photo raised. "They tried to bury my son with lies," she cried. "But thanks to the truth, he stands taller than them all. We will not be silenced." The crowd erupted. Candles lit the night. Chants shook the walls. "Justice for Ethan! Justice for Ethan!" But inside City Hall, doors slammed. Phones rang off the hook. One councilman muttered, "We need a scapegoat." Another, "The files are public, but the networks are still intact. Cut the movement's head before it grows." And somewhere, in a dimly lit room away from the cameras, men in suits planned their next move. Because Monroe wasn't wrong. He was just a middleman. And now that he was gone, the real puppeteers had no reason to stay in the shadows. The morning after the leaks, Maya found another envelope slid under her door. No return address. No fingerprints. Inside, a single photo. It showed her leaving the train yard. the USB clutched in her hand. On the back, 3 words in red ink. "We are watching." Her hands went cold. The Ramirez family was celebrating small victories. The public thought the truth had finally won. But she knew better. This wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of a war. And the people who had buried Ethan Ramirez's case weren't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The last scene fades on Maya, staring at the photo in her trembling hands, whispering, "If they're watching me, then that means they're still here."